Welcome to Season 3 of The Biz Show, sponsored by Invest Choir. Discover what's next with this insightful podcast. And now, your hosts, Barry and Lisa.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to The Biz Show. How's your day going today? I'm your host, Barry Bestpitch, and today is another solo podcast. Unfortunately, Lisa cannot be with us today, so, me. Anyway, with that said, I'm just going to jump right into it. Today's topic, we're going to talk about companies, right? Is inside the company, specifically all the departments and how they work, how they interact, and the whole business ecosystem. You know, it's important. A lot of companies, a lot of startups and stuff like that, they don't really understand all the dynamics that go into making a business run properly. And, you know, a lot of entrepreneurs, solopreneurs and stuff like that, they're wearing all the hats. But eventually, as that business grows, you're going to need to start hiring people and putting these people in different positions within the company for them to take some of those tasks off your plate, right? So today we're going to explore what those are, the whole ecosystem in regards to the business. And let me just say this. Many businesses fail, not because of bad products, but because departments can't speak the same language. So today, we're going to set out and we're going to help you fix that. With that said, each department is like an organ of a body, right? They have their own roles, but real success happens in how well they communicate, transfer information, and depend on each other to solve problems together. So let's start at the top and we'll work our way down, right? The first part and the first area of the business is obviously executive leadership. And, you know, who are they? They are your CEOs, your CFO, COO, CMO, CTO, and probably your CHRO, right? HR. And what do? Well, you know, they set the vision of the company. They're the ones that kind of allocate what the budgets are going to be and define the strategies of the company and each department and kind of what they're going to be doing. So, you know, they make every major decision flows through executive management. They rely on departments to execute those visions and strategies, so on and so forth. So those departments rely on them for resources and direction. And there can be a lot of friction here, a lot of pain points in regards to, you know, top-down decision-making without operational insight and also communication. Those two things are just, you know, they can just tear a company apart, right? Operational insight basically is understanding, you know, what the left hand is doing with the right hand, right? How sales and marketing play into, business development and how accounting and billing and payroll, how they all are intertwined with one another. After that, we take a look at the next area of the company is operations. And operations, you know, that is their whole role is they turn strategy into actual projects and services, right? So the executives have come down and says, here's our strategy, here's what we want to do, here's what we want to build, here's the services that we offer. It's now operations' role to take that information and turn it into viable products and services that customers can purchase. So they manage supply chains, logistics, inventory, vendor management, production, you name it. Key interactions that they have are going to be, you know, they work closely with finance for budgets and cost control. They work with HR for staffing needs, warehouse, manufacturing services, customer service, you name it. They work with sales for forecasting and demand. And then, of course, IT. They work with IT for systems and automation, tracking, shipping, all kinds of stuff like that, right? Pain points here is mismatch inventory and sales forecasts create supply delays. And, think about this. If you're a restaurant owner, and in that restaurant, you have a pretty steady flow of customers on Monday and on Tuesday and on Wednesday, you pretty much know what to order, right? You know how many, steaks you might need, how many baked potatoes you might need, maybe hamburgers, hot dogs, whatever the case might be. So you plan ahead and you order those things. However, if you miss a day or you skip a day or something happens, all of a sudden, wow, we don't have any more hot dogs. We are out of hot dogs, so we can't sell those. Just an example, but there's your mismatch, right? So you want to make sure your sales forecast and your inventory match up and sync up, but it's not. That's just an example. There's much more than that. The next would be finance and accounting. And, these are grouped together, but they're kind of separate. Well, they're not kind of separate. They are separate, but a lot of companies group them together. The role of finance and accounting basically is to manage budgets, profits, payroll, taxes, cash flow, financial reporting. Their key interactions are they work with every department in the company, right? Everyone needs funding for their department. So they're going to work with the C-suites, right? The CEO, the CFO, the COO, to provide financial data for decisions. They're also going to work with operations for cost controls, and they're going to work with sales and marketing for revenue projections, and then customer service as well for, customer service needs, interaction, calls, repairs, who knows, things like that, right? The friction here on this one for you to think about is finance says, we don't have the budget. Departments say, we can't grow without the budget, without money in our budget. So a lot of times that's what we see is a lot of times finance and various different departments are always fighting over what the budget is. And, how many times I know I've gone through this many times in companies where every year you got to come up with a budget. And so you're working on your budget and you might spend, 2 months kind of putting a realistic budget together. And, I've done this several times at companies, GE Capital. And I put a realistic budget. This is what I need, honest and fair. And it gets submitted. It goes up through finance and stuff like that. And I get the budget back and it's only 40% or 50% of what I asked for. And now I'm like, oh, I'm going to have to struggle. I'm going to have to cut things out of, services that we can offer, products that we can provide, or whatever the case might be, because I don't have that money. So then I resubmit the budget. We work some numbers and stuff like that, resubmit it and say, hey, look, this is the bare minimum of what I need. And then it comes back, I got 70% of that. So, again, the finance and accounting, not necessarily their fault. There's an overall budget, cash flows coming in for the company, whatever they might have is all they have to work with. But they also have to make sure that all the other departments get their budget needs too. So a lot of times all departments get maybe 60, 70% of what they're really looking for in that aspect. Kind of depends. So the next department, the fifth department here is probably one of the biggest one is HR, right? HR, talent management, human capital. It's called a couple different things, but their role basically is to hire people, onboard them, make sure they get the benefits and it fits in the company culture, handle any conflict resolution, along with probably upper management and possibly even the C-suite, and then training. And, I'll say this, and you've heard me say this many times in our podcast, training is a pet peeve of mine. And I've seen it so many times, and a lot of times this is why companies fail, because they've never trained their employees to do their job. I see it daily, and I talk with companies, and they're struggling because certain people in a company don't know what to do. They don't do anything because they've never been taught, this is my job, this is what I need to do, this is how to do it. So what happens there is it causes a disconnect and a chain reaction down the line for a bunch of other departments, because they're waiting on them to do something that they don't either A, know to do, or B, don't know how to do it well enough to kick it down the line. So that's a big for me. It's one of my big pet peeves. Security and training are the two big. The interactions with human resources basically is they work and train every team to understand, or they work with every team to understand their staffing needs, right? So, if you're customer service, how many customer service reps do you need answering the phones? If you are providing professional services, maybe network or security analysts or whatever the case might be, how many of these engineers do you need? Or, if you've got products and manufacturing, how many people in the warehouse or in the production line do you need to be able to produce that? So they work with all teams. They also work with finance because they need salary budgets, right? They need to know how much money they have to bring people on. They work with legal to understand, labor laws and compliancy, make sure that they're in compliance. And then they also work with leadership, right? The organizational structuring and maybe restructuring of the company based off of various different things. Friction here, I think it's interesting because most people think HR seems to be policy enforcers, right? Instead of strategic partners. And you should really think of them as strategic partners with your division. Yes, they have to enforce certain policies, especially if it's labor and OSHA and stuff like that, but they're there to keep the company out of trouble. And if you are doing something as a manager in a different department and you don't know what the labor laws are, and you're having people do things that are against the law, the labor laws of your state, you can really get the company in a lot of legal trouble, and that can also cost the company a lot of money. So they're there to, yes, enforce or monitor, if you will, the labor laws, make sure that managers are doing their jobs. For instance, in California, people, when you're doing an interview, there's certain questions you can't ask. You can't ask how old they are. You can't ask how much money they made at their past jobs. You can't even ask what the religion they have, or if they smoke, or if they have problems with issues with daycare, or if do they have transportation to get to work. Those are all forbidden questions to ask in California. It's I guess somebody walks in the door, you just hire them, because what can you ask them? That said, though, I'm being a little facetious here on that, but the bottom line is HR is there to help keep you out of trouble, or keep the company out of trouble. So next one, number 6 here, Lisa and I have talked about this many times. So I'm going to say, sales, marketing, and business development. And, they a lot of companies group those together, and they're really separate, right? Here we're talking about sales and business development. We'll group those together for this conversation. However, to me, they're completely different. But what's their role? I mean, their roles are kind of the same. They generate revenue, right? They close deals and they manage customer relationships. And business development does that just as well sales do, but differently. Their interactions, well, they have to interact with marketing, right? Because they need to get the leads, and messaging to be able to sell things. They work with financing, right? So that they know what the pricing of the products are going to be, and also commissions and stuff like that. They're going to work with operations to understand what product availability is, especially if it's product, or even services, right? Because in services, you might have 10 engineers that are system engineers out working on computers and stuff like that. And all of them are out working, and there's nobody left back to go out to new clients. So, they're going to have a handle on that. And then, of course, customer service, because once sales are done and completed, most of the time, that customer is then handed off to customer service. Even on the sales rep or business development will still manage the customer from a account management perspective, but customer service will handle the bulk of what's coming in next because, hey, they already got the product. So now it's what's, if something goes wrong, how do we fix that? Friction here on this one basically is sales is always blaming marketing for bad leads. And then operations is always blaming sales for overpromising. And honestly, I've seen this happen so many times. Whereas I've gotten sales leads, and I'm not a sales guy, but I've seen sales leads come in that don't even match what the criteria is that we're looking for. And also, the sales team is, and I've experienced, they're out there selling anything and everything. I was the vice president of professional services at GE. And so I had a team of engineers and programmers and developers and, network engineers. Sometimes sales would promise, oh, we could do this or we could do that. And I didn't have anybody with the skill sets to do that. So on my side, I had to really sit down and have training courses or classes with the sales for them to understand who my engineers were and what their skills were. And you can't sell past those skills. So that's how I handled it. And that worked out well. The sales manager and I got together, we sat down, we talked about it, then we brought all the sales teams in and we kind of just had some meetings to discuss that. The next department is marketing, right? And marketing and communications, they can go hand in hand. Their role is basically branding, advertising, content, digital strategies, and lead generation. And the thing is I've said this in the past, right? Marketing does the lead generation. Sales then converts those leads into customers and revenue. So anyways, marketing's interactions, they interact with sales. How do they do that? Well, they convert leads. They help, they pass the leads over to sales for them to convert into revenue. Marketing also works with product, understand the features of messaging, right? So if you got a product that you're selling, they're going to come up with the verbiage and the images and all that stuff for ads and stuff like that. They're also going to work with HR, right, for employer branding, make sure that they get the right type of employees and stuff like that. And then, of course, legal for content compliance, right? Make sure that what they're saying, I hate to say this because do we see it anymore? But truth in advertising, is that a thing anymore? Could be. So, in a nutshell, marketing, they actually do have a big role in the company, right? Because they're the messaging of the company. But the friction really lies in the fact that they can misalign messaging, and then product reality might not always be what was promised. So got to make sure that you're working on that topic. The next is R&D, right? Research and development. That's a big one. Some companies don't have this necessarily because, they're just reselling stuff that's already out there, but some do. And so what's the role is they build and they improve products and services, innovate and research trends. So, and that's something interesting, right? Research trends, because it's never really been a part of it in the past, but yet nonetheless, research the trends on products or on sales or whatever the case might be. So R&D definitely could be that part of it. Interaction is, of course, with sales and marketing for customer feedback. They also operations for manufacturability, finance for development budgets, and then of course legal for patents and trademarks and things like that and compliances. The frictions for them is innovation versus budget constraints, in the sense that it's hard to innovate when you don't have the money to do it. And so, yeah, you got the great ideas to build this and do that, but you can't build it because you don't have the money to do it. And then once you do build it, you got to test it out and all this other stuff. So you got to wait for the budget to catch up with that. Next is IT, right? Technology data. They touch everybody. So their role, of course, is tech infrastructure, cybersecurity, software tools, automation, AI integration, data analytics. They kind of play the entire gamut of everything within the company. Their interactions is with every team in the company, because most every team in the company has some type of a computer or has some type of data need, so on and so forth. They work with finance for systems, for accounting, to understand what the budget is to buy new computers, your desktops or printers or whatever the case might be. They work with HR for the HRIS system. By the way, HRIS is human resources. It's the software that they use to manage onboarding and keeping track of employees and things like that. They work with sales and marketing, right? And CRM packages, analytics, and things like that. Also operations for ERP, CRM, logistic tools. Those are all there. The friction that I see here, that I have seen here, is tech is asked to fix everything. However, there's no context behind that. So, I know in the past we've had, the standard desktops for our employees to use computers. But then somebody would bring in a tablet or whatever the case might be, and we're doing some stuff on that. However, we don't know how to work on that tablet because it's not part of our main infrastructure for the company. But yet, still, we can be required to do that, or they can be required to do that. Next is customer service and client success. And to me, besides sales and customer service, these are the two most important departments. Not that they're important to anyone other, but these are the ones that touch the customer, right? So these are customer facing. Remember that. Their role is to solve customer issues, gather feedback, maintain relationships. So they interact with sales, obviously the customer handoff after the sale. They work with product, with operations, manufacturing, to help fix bugs, feature requests, things like that. Marketing, they'll work with marketing to get testimonials and case studies. And then also finance for refunds, billing issues, things like that. So again, these are the people that are customer facing, right? Frontline teams are, and it's sad because a lot of times they're ignored by leadership despite having the most painful job in the company. A lot of times when the customers call them, they're not happy. Whatever product they have or service they got is not working. And now they're frustrated because they want to use it and they can't because, it's DOA. And so they get on the phone, they talk to customer service, and unfortunately, the poor customer service rep is the one that is taking most of the flack over the product not working, even though it's not their fault. But I guess that's the nature of being human. Next is legal and compliance. And in legal and compliance, what do? Well, they negotiate contracts, or draft contracts, assess risk management, make sure that regulatory compliances are in place, make sure that data privacy and employment laws are all covered and stuff like that. So they're going to work those with HR, right? Interaction with HR for employment laws, labor laws. They're going to work with sales for contact reviews to make sure everything's done properly. Product, they're going to work with them for trademarks, patents, copyrights, and then finance for audits and compliances. And it's funny because anywhere you go, the friction on the legal department is they are the department of no, right? Everywhere you go, no, no, no. That said, right, these are some of most of the departments within an organization, a corporation that is now probably a medium size and growing to a larger size. This is the ecosystem, right? Not one department is better than the other department. They all need to work in tandem with one another so that they can help the customer, whether it's for services or for sales. They need to sharing data across all the departments. Their goals all need to align, right? Sales, marketing, and finance, they should have one revenue goal. And then technology-wise, make sure that, ERP, CRM, AI, dashboards, whatever the case, those are integrated into your system. And then communicate regularly across all of these platforms. I used to have weekly meetings. I know people get, pain, moans and groans when you say that, but it works. And so every Monday at 10 o'clock, I would have a 1-hour meeting with all the department heads. We would come in and every department head would go through what they're working on and what problems they're having and who can solve that problem within that room, right? If sales is having a problem, they're not getting enough leads, well, then they're going to be talking to marketing and say, marketing, we need more leads, more qualified leads maybe, right? Or if R&D says, hey, we got this new project going on, but we don't have enough funding for it, then they're going to be talking to finance about, hey, we need more budget, funding in our budget to get this happen. So there's a lot of things that they all work together, right? It's all, the company's this big cog in the wheel. And then all these departments are the spokes that tie into that company. And with all of them that are working properly, that makes the company successful. All right, well, that's it for this episode. I appreciate it so much. Please feel free to reach out to Lisa or myself, right? You can reach us at the Biz Show Facebook page. You can also reach us at investquire.com. And we look forward to talking to you. All right, you guys have a good day and go out there and have fun. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Biz Show podcast. Subscribe to stay updated and follow Barry and Lisa on Facebook at The Biz Show. Share your comments or suggest specific business topics you'd like to hear. Bye.